Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joris. That screen is not working very well, so I'm going to be pointing in that one, or at least I'm going to try to remember to do that. I work for Dazzle, small company here in Belgium. You can find me on Twitter with that handle and my company with that one. And I would like to introduce the Search API ecosystem as well as the team that works on it. You can see a few people in the pictures, and basically they are the ones that build Search API Facets, Search API Solar, Search API Sorts, autocomplete, location, whatever you want. Those 5-6 people are pretty much the only ones who build it. So that's really amazing that so few people can build such a complex system. So I'd like to start with some history. In Drupal, yes?
Before you start, if you want to stay in the shot of the camera that's filming you, you can't actually move beyond the camera there.
Okay.
But now you're not in the view. Just say.
I'm not in view now. Okay. Am I in view of the camera right now? Okay, thanks. I'll try to remember that. Not look at that screen and not go past the banner. Okay, sorry. So, history. It's a small history lesson, no worries. So in Drupal 7, you had Apache Solar and Search API. Two modules that did more or less the same thing, provide search for Drupal. They had a very, very different approach. So Thomas Drunken Monkey, who's the maintainer of Search API, and Nick Veenhoff, who's the maintainer of Apache Solar, they had very different ideas on how things should work. One was very coupled with Drupal, entity API integration, and very strict about everything having to go through entities, while Apache Solar was somewhat more flexible, and they had different use cases, but two very big modules and only one person per project to maintain it, and it was too much. So they decided for Drupal 8, they were going to do some crowdfunding, and they were going to do Search API and Apache Solar as one project to lessen the maintenance burden, to make a better product for all of us, and to, make sure that the entire ecosystem didn't have to work with both modules at the same time, making maintenance much harder for everyone. So to make everything simpler, they decided we merge everything. So in 2013, that's a while ago, plans started to merge everything together. There was some crowdfunding, there were sprints in Belgium, in Switzerland, some other places, and there were a couple of Google Summer of Code students who started on porting everything. And as you can see, I pressed something that was not, okay, good. As you can see in Szeged, Drupal Dev Days, there was a lot of action going on. That's basically when everything geared up and everyone was like, yeah, we're gonna do this, we're gonna merge everything. And then there's like nothing until the sponsored sprint, and then like half a year of nothing until another event, and then half a year of nothing, and then wait another event, and half a year of nothing. You can kind of see the point here. It was basically whenever there was a Drupal event and Search API people were around, things got done, and in between, not so much. That's actually kind of still the case. I was sprinting here today. I will be sprinting at DrupalCon, and in between, not that much is going on. I'm not saying it's not maintained, but it's for having more than 2 people around really helps to get things done in the issue queue. So, an overview. This is kind of like a page that you would want to build if you want to build something with search. I'm guessing that most of you know Amazon. they do search really well. It's not Drupal, but it's an example of a search page. So if we were to build this in Drupal, if you had the brilliant idea, I'm going to build Amazon, but in Drupal, then these would be entities, and that would be probably a view, and that would be a keyword search. You'd have sorts, you'd have facets, and also some views filters, probably. That's how I would build it. I'm not sure if anyone else has a brilliant idea on another way to build it, but I guess most of us would do something like this. So if we were to build something like this in Drupal, you would need something that does facets, that does filtering, that does sorting and displaying of entities and searching in those entities and using a view to get everything together. And that's basically what we did with Search API. So the ecosystem of Search API contains a bunch of modules. Some of them are stable, some of them are not. Search API now comes with Search API database as a backend included in within the module, so you can actually just install Search API and have the database backend included, and that's stable. Release was tagged 2 days ago for 1.4 with some bug fixes, but no API breaks, and there won't be any API breaks. And if we break something, then we will provide upgrade paths and backwards compatibility layers and whatever you need to make sure that your code that works with Search API right now will work until the end of 1.x. It might not work for 2.x, but that's a different branch, so that's stable. Search API Solar, also stable. It will also not break anything. There won't be any breaks in the API as well as your configuration. So, but why would you want to use Solar over database? The only reason is if you want to do something really complex. So it has nothing to do with the size of the data set. Because Drupal.org runs with Search API on Drupal 7 for the issue queue. And I haven't built anything that has the same amount of nodes as the issue queues of Drupal.org. If anyone here has, I would like to talk to you, because maybe you can teach me things about MySQL optimization that I have never thought about, but that's the size that can support a MySQL database or a SQL database. So size is not a reason to go from database to Solar. If you want to do something more like this, then you have to use Solar or Elasticsearch, because that's not possible with a database backend related content. Something that's also easier to do with Solar is stemming, so making sure that verbs are always used in the same way. That's something that's easier to do with Solar. It's also possible with database. So I always recommend people, if you are building something with Drupal 8 and you're using Search API, just build it with the database backend. And as soon as you see that you run into a feature that you can't build with database, then try Solar. And if it's something, if your server is really having response time problems because the database hits too much and you can't separate the database into multiple databases or do sharding or something like that, then you can use Solar, because it's a different instance and your SQL database will not be hit as much, because most search results are not cached. Because what are the chances of two people in a row searching for the exact same word? People search for the same things, but usually we use different words or different keywords to find the same thing. So there's no good way to cache those, because there's different words you're looking for, so we have to do the query again, and then we can cache the results page, but not always. So that's another reason. So facets, still in alpha 11. We've got beta blockers, but I'll explain those later. Then we've got add-ons. There's a multilingual plugin to make Solr understand multilingual better. There's autocomplete, there's sorts, synonyms, flag, exclude entity, location, page. There's pretty paths for facets. There's entry reference formatters. I can fill 7 slides, just modules that integrate with Search API. And I'm not going to mention all of them. But work has been done on all of those, at least, that have at least an alpha release for Drupal 8. And then there's customizations. I'll explain that later in the presentation. So, Search API DB. I hope my pointer is somewhere on that screen. Okay. So, this is how you install Search API. You install Search API, the database backend, and Search API DB default, which is it provides you with an index, a server, and a view that uses those to make a page. So you enable the modules, and then you go to the front end, and you go to /search/content. That's the path on which the default view is enabled, and you see no content because you have to clear caches. Sometimes people forget things even when recording demos. I hope this is at least somewhat readable for everyone, and if it's not, they are embedded in the slides, so hopefully that'll be easier. You also have to index all content into the backend to make sure that everything is available in the correct tables, and then you have a view which lists your content. This is how you set up search with Search API and database backend, and a view in Drupal 8. 59 seconds. So you can go to your boss tomorrow or on Monday and tell them, we can use Search API, it'll take us 1 minute and everything will be done. And then your boss will say, okay, so that means we can do search for all of our customers in 10 minutes. And then you'll have to tell them, this only works if you're using the basic page content type and the article content type and no other content types, and you have a body field and a title field and a tags field, because those are the only things that are indexed. But it's a good enough starting point for you to play around with. The defaults module is just a bunch of configuration that gets imported to make sure that you can play around, and you can just uninstall it afterwards because all it does is install that configuration. So on Monday, when your boss says, okay, now show me other fields, then you go back to this presentation and tell them that you'll need some more time to enable those fields. So you see a list of fields already indexed. In Drupal 7, this was a list of all the available fields, but that was a problem because we had Birdier, and he had a site with 700 fields, and this page kept on crashing. So we now have a separate page that has the fields. So Search API doesn't crash in the backend all the time, and it only crashes sometimes. So you add the term ID field. You say OK, and then it gets added. You can change the machine name of the field and the label. The machine name is only changeable at this time before you index data into it, because otherwise we run in so much trouble. This is a slightly older video right now. The input fields are disabled. You have to re-index all the content. So you have to remember that if you deploy a change like this, that you have to re-index all content because the schema has changed, so it has no notion about that field. So everything is cleared and search won't work until you re-indexed, at least on database. So you index all items, and that's it. Those fields are now indexed. Now, why do you need to index separate fields? You don't need it for searching, because you can just render the entire entity, including all the images and paragraphs in terms and whatever you want, and render that and store it inside the database and search in that. So there's no need to do it for normal search. The only reason why you need to add fields is if you want to search for them specifically. So either through a filter in a view, or a facet, or an autocomplete field, or a sort field. Those are the only reasons why you would need to add the separate fields as a separate thing. So also if you want to use Tika, for example, to extract the text from a PDF file into Search API, then you have to add that separate field and have to configure it. So while this was running, you saw that there's also a processors tab, and I'm not coming back to it, but I'll show it during the facets part of this presentation. But it's pretty much the same thing. Processes are things that run before the query happens or after it happens, and you can manipulate data, either through filtering HTML out of the results, or through transliteration, making sure that all accents don't really matter anymore, which is great for us. So you don't have to remember how French words are spelled. You can just type in an E and it'll find it. So I'd like to talk to you about Solar now. So if you're installing Drupal 8, who of you have worked with Drupal 8 without using Composer? A couple, okay. So if your default installation of Drupal 8, or the way that you work with it, is without Composer, then you're going to run into trouble if you're trying to install Search API Solar, because it needs the Solarium module. Or package. It's not a Drupal module, it's a PHP library. It has 1 million tests. It's used by over 1 million, or it has over 1 million downloads. And it's better than I could do it, and better than most of the people who work on Solar could do it. And it's also something that we don't have to do. So we use their code, because it's open source, to make our lives easier and to make sure that everything works better for you. Which means that you have to use Composer to install it. In this case, I require Search API Solar, and that installs the Solarium library, Search API, and Search API Solar. So always use Composer to install Search API Solar, or pages don't work and everything breaks and sadness happens. So there's one more thing that you have to do, and that's the configuration of your Solar server. There's configuration of Solar that lives inside of the Drupal module, but the Solar server can't find the Drupal module. It has no notion of what Drupal is. Solar is Java, so what do they care about Drupal? So you have to copy that configuration into Solar, into the index that you're going to be using with Solar, and then you can switch to Solar. If you don't do this, then it won't work. You can write your own configuration, but why would you? It's already provided. Marcus has done all the work, so there's no need to do it yourself. You can just copy those files over into the correct Solar server and run with it. So switching to Solar. I told you earlier, just start with a database backend and switch to Solar when it's needed. So if you have to switch to Solar, you'll see on the side there's a log of the Solar log, the Solar server's log files. So I configure the new Solar server by giving it the correct IP and directory, saving it, and then going back to Search API. And the index that I already created on the database server, I'm just going to say, nope, no database, Solar. And done. That's it. Index all the content into Solar. Everything works. So switching to Solar is not something that you really have to be afraid of, because it's basically, it's 40 seconds here, because it's 2 nodes. If you have 200,000 nodes, it'll take longer because it has to index all the data into Solr. But that's it. The configuration is really, really easy because you don't have to do anything. You just have to switch from database to Solr. And if you want to have like a second Solr server, then you can do that. You can switch it everywhere you want. And you could see the terminal screen filled with data when I was doing things. And that's to prove to all of you that I'm not lying and that's actually using Solr. So, facets. Am I going too quickly? No? Okay. Great. So facets are a way of filtering your data, and I'm going to show you how to configure it. So first of all, facets use a facet source, and that's a view or a search API page or anything else that can provide views or the plugin. And then you can choose the field which you want to use. Those fields come from the index, which is why we configured the fields earlier. And you can just save the default configuration because we try to be as sane as possible with that. And every facet is automatically a block. So you create a facet through the UI, it automatically creates a block for you. You place the block, save the page, and there's a facet. That's it. Now, I told you just save the default configuration. That'll work most of the time. Unless you're using dates or ranges, or you want to have IDs of a term indexed and you want to display not the ID, because who knows the difference between 7 and 11 in just the list of colors. You have to load the actual term and then use its name to display, so your users know that 7 was red and 11 was blue. So we provide you with processors that make it easier, or you just have to check a box and save a configuration and it'll do things for you. It won't do those magically, so there's a cost related to that. If you want to, for example, do a term load, or you index a term ID and you want to have the name of the term, then there's an obvious cost that we have to load the term on every page load. And if you have 700 options in your facets, then your page will be much slower. So there's an obvious cost to all of those things. At least I hope that's obvious, that term loads or database queries make pages load slower. And if it's not, then I'm sorry for assuming. So facets is currently still in alpha, and we have about 12 issues that we've identified as a problem or a blocker for going into beta, and they need review. Over half of them are done. I think they're done. I wrote a patch, but I don't want to commit it without at least someone else looking at it and saying, I tested, it's okay. And so if any of you want to help, just review a beta blocker, please. Thank you. And there's one that's really a big problem, which is distinguishing between different facet types. And that might sound somewhat confusing. But for example, if you want to have a range slider, so you have an e-commerce site and each product that's indexed has a price, and you want to drag, like on Zalando, I want to have minimum of 50 euros and a maximum of 70. And it's a slider, you can drag and drop, or you can drag the slider. Currently, we loop through all the results and check, is this higher than 50 and lower than 70? Is this higher than 50 and lower than 70? And we loop through all of them. And we do that again to display them, and we do it in the query as well. And that's bad for performance. If you have 200 products, it might work okay. If you have 2,000 products, sorry, it won't be very performant. We have an idea on how to fix it. but we haven't implemented it, and we're not sure that the idea will work, and we would like some feedback, because Solar has an API for ranges, and you can just tell them, this is the minimum, this is the maximum, and Solar will do magic, and will return me the items that are in between those. And in theory, that would be awesome to use. But we have no idea, and with the current API, it's not going to work, and we have to break the API, but we don't know in which way to break the API. So if that sounds interesting to you, then I would like to point you to that issue. So I told you about multilingual earlier. Search API Solar has a multilingual module. And what that does is it adds schemas per language. So most of you know that German has a very different way of how words work than Dutch and then French does. It's different. And stemming is different. And the configuration for how to stem and the configuration for how to store those words is different. And Solar knows about languages. It has configuration embedded about how languages work and about how everything should be configured. And Marcus, who is building a really big website in Drupal 8 with 24 languages or something crazy like that, he has built a module with all the configuration that he uses, and that has been reviewed, and everyone likes that configuration. So we decided, okay, we're going to make a module for that. And this is Search API Solar Multilingual. It's stable, and it has all the configuration that Biologisch Instituut for it's something sciences, something science. It's a bio institute for science. They have a very big, very multilingual site, and all their configuration, their Solar specific configuration for languages is on Drupal.org. And it works like magic. There's autocomplete, which is currently alpha. It has a very big problem that case-insensitive searches don't work yet, but there's a really awesome thing that I would like to say, and that's there's a Danish company, dbc.dk, I think, and they are sponsoring Drunken Monkey until it reaches beta 1. So all of the time that he needs, he can take as much time as he wants to work on autocomplete from now until the first beta release to make it work, to make it good. So they are really awesome, that Danish company, and that's really cool of them to make sure that he doesn't have to do other work and then do this in the evenings. So that's really great. Search API location. Search API location is a module that provides geospatial information to Drupal. Or, well, it uses the geospatial information that Drupal provides to make searching for locations awesome. And we had a Google Summer of Code student who wanted to work on that. And Nick Veenhoff and we said, okay, cool. That sounds like a really cool plan. And we told them, make it work like Airbnb. So if you've seen Airbnb, they have a really cool map, and if you move the map, then the search results change. If you zoom in, then they also change. Zoom out, you get the picture. And we told them, we want you to do that. We want you to make Airbnb in Drupal. Well, at least the searching of Airbnb. We want you to make that in Drupal. And he had 3 months, and he almost did it. Almost. It's still in alpha. I can't show a demo because we're using OpenStreetMaps, and OpenStreetMaps still has a bug in the API currently, or at least in JavaScript, but things are grouped, and if you click through on the 23, then you will see that it shows those 23 maps or those 23 locations on the map in a better location, in a more refined location, and that works. Just it does like 7 refreshes to get there, and it's a bug in the JavaScript file that we use, so it would be kind of silly to show that demo right now, but we hope to have that the maintainers of the JavaScript library that we use, we hope to have them fix it soon so that everyone can use it. But that means that we can do Airbnb-like searching with Drupal very soon. Hopefully by DrupalCon Vienna, that should be a possibility. So tell your designers to wait a little bit, and then they can start designing searches that work like the Airbnb one, and that'll be cool. This requires no configuration at all. The only thing it requires is for you to have a field that provides geodata, geospatial data, and the rest works more or less like magic. This is also a facet, so that means that it's dependent on the results and everything works within the ecosystem. So one more thing for the more hardcore developers in the audience, Travis is an open source CI system. That'll be good enough. And we use that to run tests for Search API and Facets and Solr and Multilingual every single day on Travis. And we do that on Travis because Drupal.org only supports MySQL, and it doesn't support Solr. So we can't run tests for Solr without having an actual Solr server. That's why we use Travis, because Travis allows us to have a Docker box, and we can just do sudo apt-get install Solr, whatever, how that works. I'm not exactly sure. It's in there in the configuration, but that makes sure that every single day everything is tested on Drupal 8.current, which is 4 right now, 3. Anyway, 8 right now. And it works, it runs those tests every single day with the latest commit of Search API, the latest commit of Solr, and it makes sure that the integration between all of the modules that we maintain, which is about 8, that it keeps on working. And if we break something, we see it in IRC the day after. We broke something, we have to fix it. As you can see, I'll use that screen. There was a problem with Solr earlier this week, and we fixed it because Travis told us, fix it. There's also a problem with Facets, but that's not a real problem. That's because Travis is too slow, and I have too many tests, and it tells me after 50 minutes, I don't want to execute anything anymore. And we have, it works on PHP 7, because that's fast enough, but PHP 5.6 doesn't work. It's not fast enough. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. I have no idea why. It just happens. But the solution for that is buying an actual Travis account, and I'm already investing enough time that I don't want to also invest money, so occasional failures it is. So, customization. I told you earlier that we were going to discuss this. Customization of Search API, Facets, and all the things happens through the plugin API. I can do another hour-long talk about the plugin API, but I'll try to keep it as short as possible. For non-developers, you can zone out now. So how do I know what plugins there are? Every module, or most Drupal 8 modules, have a source directory with annotation as one of the subdirectories. This one is from Facets, and it has a bunch of classes in it. And those annotations are the possibilities for plugins that you can create to customize the behavior of the module. So how do I create a plugin? You create a custom module, and you add a processor to it. It's not very readable, I know. I'll get to the contents of it. I've been using this example for the last couple of times that I've given this session. And every single time I've asked the audience, have you had to do this? And not a single time anyone has said yes. So I'm hoping that does not change today. We have a fake example of how to do a plugin. And this is because the customer, or I, has said every single content on my website that has a pipe, vertical pipe, in the title of the node cannot be searched. Those should be ignored. Has anyone ever had that exact requirement by a client? No changes. Okay. So this is a kind of a silly example, but the actual code I'll show you where to change that into something more useful. So how does this work? First of all, you create an annotation, which looks like comments, but is actual functional code. You tell it, I want to build a search API thing. It has an ID, it has a label and a description, which whatever makes you find it in the UI, and it has stages. Stages is either before everything goes into the index, after everything has been sent to the index, before we run a query to Solr or database, and after that query has come back. Those are the 4 individual stages for the Search API plugins. Then you tell, you have to implement this function, supports index, and we're going to do stuff with nodes. So if there are no nodes in the actual index, then it's not supposed to work. So loop through all of the data sources, make sure that it has a node. If it does, okay. If it doesn't, return false. This makes sure that you don't have to check that for that everywhere in your code, which is one of the things that Chris told us in the keynote earlier today, that you don't have to check for return types. This is something that makes sure that a processor cannot be applied to something that can't work with it. However, there can be multiple entity types in one index, so you have to make sure that it at least somewhat works. And then you have to write the actual code. I've chosen the silly example of the pipe ignore because that makes this fit on one slide. But as you can see, you get an array of items, so a bunch of things that are supposed to go to Search API. And then you say, is this a node? Does it have something in the title that I don't want to have? So pipe ignore in this case. If it does, unset it. And all of this code, these 7 lines, make sure that those things will not be searchable because they are not in Search API, and so that will make everything work. I'm sure that no one will have to copy and paste this exact code in their project. However, if you have to, I recently wrote a processor like this where it was if node user or author has a taxonomy reference to a taxonomy term, and that has an author with a role that is not some specific value, then it's not supposed to be searchable. I think it was allowed author or something like that. I mean, you can write any code that you want, and having something like that configurable through the UI would be a nightmare. I mean, it would be really, really complicated. Writing that in code is easier. Not for everyone, I understand, but I hope that you can see that these small lines of code can help you make your project work in the way that your client requires it to work. And there's a bunch of things. Those are the stages. You can add properties, virtual properties to an item. You can change them and do all kinds of funny things. So, as a review, we've talked about the history, We've talked about database, Solr and facets, multilingual, and some other customizations. Are there any questions? Yes.
Concerning the performance problem with facet is specific to Solar or whether
So the
engine are also impact this loop?
The performance problem that I mentioned earlier with ranges, this can only be solved in Solr. So database will always have a problem because there's no native range type thing that you can do in SQL, as far as I know anyway. At least not one that works as nice as the one in Solr does. So we can solve it in Solr. I don't think we can solve it with a database backend, at least not until someone comes along and either pays us a lot of money or does it themselves. So yes, it will be a problem with every backend, but only for ranges. So only if you need specific range information between one value, between A and Z, that's the only problem. There's no problem if you just want normal lists or stuff like that. That'll work fine. Multilingual search with database. That'll work. Yes, there is a but. Not as well as it does with Solr if you want to use stemming. And stemming is really useful, especially in languages like Dutch and German that have different vervoegingen, uitgangen. I don't. Yes. Yeah, that have different ends to the word as depending on what comes before it. I'm not sure how to actually say this in English. So that's important for those languages, for our languages. For English, it's not as important. For French, it's also not as important. And it works, and it works really well. Multilingual search with database. It just, the big problem is stemming. Stemming is a lot easier to do with Solr. So again, if you want to pay us a lot of money, then we can hopefully find a good solution. But I say us, but I don't mean me specifically or my company. I just mean the Drupal community in general, or people who would like to work on search-related stuff. I don't want to get rich, but I just don't want to get poor doing it either. Any other questions? I'm just going to show the sponsors. Yeah.
One question, a problem that I had previously with Search API and Solr in Drupal 7. Is there a possibility with Drupal 8 and the module now in its current state to implement the biasing the results through the Drupal side, but not only the configuration on the Solr, and also grouping the results?
So result grouping in Drupal and not in Solr. That's your question. Okay. Sure, views. Views can do grouping, right? Yeah. So that's a solution. I think that's the easiest solution. You could write a custom processor to do the actual work, but I would do that with views. And as soon as views is not sufficient, then you can write something else that does it, but there's no easy configuration to do it. There's no magic make this grouped button. Any other questions? Oh.
About the biasing.
Biasing. So biasing is, I'm not sure if I understand you correctly, but is biasing like the...
Specific content type of our content.
Okay, so specific content types have more priority. Yeah, there is an option to do that. I think there's even a specific module to do that. So it's called boosting content, and there's Search API Boost, I think, or boosted content or something like that. If you Google for Search API Boost, you will find some module that provides a processor, and all it does is gives you nice little drop downs. Content type news has 5, and content type events has 7, and it just does it sorts by relevance and thus times your configuration per content type to have somewhat solid. Yeah.
Sorry, maybe it's a stupid question, but as far as I understood, Search API integrated with views, so we can use views to display.
Yeah.
Right? And basically we can put facets on this page, but how does connection between facet field and user results are set up? Because, for example,
so what's the connection between a facet field and a view? Yeah. How does a view know that it has to actually filter? Okay. So we support both page views and block views with facets, and page views are quite easy because all we do is we render the facet, and in the facet we say hook search API query alter, and we tell them every single search API query that gets executed after I have been executed at this condition. Facet value is value. And that's how it works. For blocks, it's a little bit more complicated because you can actually show two Search API-based views on the same page and have only one facet block that does one of the views and not the other view. But we found a way to make that work as well. But that's a little bit more in the code that looks a little bit more complicated because it's a little bit more of a complicated setup. But it's basically just a hook that tells Search API to add filters to the next query or to all queries. Yes.
As we talk about the views, is it possible to make relationship between database data and search?
Is it possible to relate a normal Drupal field to a Search API field? Is that's the question? Not without doing very complex magic, no, or custom code rather. It is possible if you index that field into Search API, and that's the best and the easiest solution. Just add it to the index. Doesn't matter if there's 300 fields. I told you about Birdie site with 600 fields. That runs fine. It doesn't have 600 field indexed, but it runs fine and has, just add it to the index and do it there. That's the easiest solution. Okay. Any other questions? No? Okay. I get a sign that I have to start ending this, so thanks for listening. If there are any other questions, just talk to me outside somewhere after I've had a cigarette, and then